NIRSA family and friends. I am so excited to have you all here with us today for our first part of the vlog series titled Change Makers of NIRSA. We are looking forward to kind of getting folks together throughout the year to talk about the concept of critical hope. In a recent message that we sent out about the series, I just shared a little bit about how throughout the year we're going to continue to navigate social changes while working in environments made up of 4 generations, sharing information through various modes of communication, competing for environmental resources, and addressing systemic structures that perpetuate injustice, and constantly reimagining how we do what we do, all while trying to give attention to the importance of our personal well-being and the well-being of those that we serve. This work is complex and continuous, and we're really excited about all of you joining us for this journey this year. My goal, serving as NIRSA president this year, I decided to focus these efforts on being rooted in our work around looking through this work through injustice, the work of racial injustice and the pandemic and how we respond to change through a lens of critical hope. And so with that, before we get kicked off, I want to share a little bit about just what is hope? What is this idea of hope? Naive hope really kind of focuses more on this concept of a weak form of hope, and it's very unappreciative of how much work really needs to be done. Critical hope is when we're really focusing on, asking the difficult questions, finding ways to explore sensitive subjects, and, how are we going to step into the space and ask the daring questions that we all want to know more about and create solutions for. And so to get us started today, I'm excited to have with us Todd, Kevin, Vicki, and Michael. And so before we kind of dive into these questions about critical hope in relation to all the interesting challenges that we're facing still this year and kind of working through. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd to get us started for introductions. And share a little bit about something that brings you joy, Todd.
Okay. My name is Todd Bauch, and I'm the Associate Director of Operations at Portland State University in Oregon. And I may be setting the bar really low with what brings me joy. So my colleagues will be able to elevate this bar, but I'm just going to say simply that one activity that routinely brings me joy is the ability to spin around in circles. And, it all started off being a little kid and on a stool or whatever. And now it's progressed to being on skis or in a kayak. But yeah, just the ability to go around in a circle.
Thank you, Todd. How about you, Kevin?
Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kevin George, Director of Campus Recreation at Rowan University in Southern New Jersey. I guess what brings me joy is the opportunities I've had in the pandemic to see my children more often. So my 10, turning 7, and turning 3-year-olds. So especially the 2 turning 3-year-old, just the joy and the progress of running to just all those milestones that we get to see, not as often, but being able to work from home sometimes and seeing that. So that's what really brings me joy, and just capturing those moments, because sometimes we take those for granted and then they grow up really fast.
Thanks, Kevin. How about you, Vicki?
I'm Vicki Highstreet, University of Nebraska, and I am currently serving in an interim role as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Project Manager for the Division of Student Affairs, trying to create some sustainable structure around diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of growth and learning for our divisional staff. So very new role. Todd, you're spinning around circles made me a little seasick, but I can appreciate that, because knowing you, I'm sure that does bring you joy. For me, it's I'm getting to the point in my career where I can see the other side, and I'm getting ready to build a new house. And so right now, all my focus is on it's all about me.
Thanks, Vicki. How about you, Michael?
So yeah, Mike Howard from Duke University. I'm the Managing Director of Facilities, but I have the opportunity to oversee aquatics, fitness, risk management, and memberships as well. And I know as a group, we kind of talked about not stealing each other's answers, but Kevin stole my answer before we got to a question. What brings me joy is my 2-year-old. Hayes is extremely fun young man. And during this pandemic, obviously, we had an opportunity to spend a lot more time together than normal. So that's a blessing that I don't take for granted, and definitely enjoy being a father and spending time with him and my wife.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm so excited to have all of us here today to get this kicked off. Our goal is hopefully, there's so many people within the NIRSA membership who are making change happen on the ground on their campuses and within the association. And I wish I could highlight everyone. We're hoping to highlight at least 20 to 24 individuals throughout this vlog series. And then also we'll be sharing some quotes from our colleagues through different social media platforms. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. And this is really focusing on this concept of critical hope, demanding that leaders take up the most difficult challenges, explore the most sensitive subjects, and raise the most daring questions. So again, critical hope is really focused on this concept of action. When we exhibit critical hope, we are more willing to explore these sensitive subjects and raise the questions that need to be asked. How have you explored sensitive subjects or raised daring questions over the past year during the impact COVID had on our campus and the exposure to racial injustice? Kevin, why don't you take this one first?
Great, thank you. And I first of all want to just thank our team at Rowan University with our campus recreation, because they're all in on and making sure that we address racial injustice and what we can do about our communities and populations that we serve. So this past year, we did a deep dive into DEI and all, including racial injustice, but all the things, neurodiversity and hidden and physical disability. So we wanted to make sure that we made a commitment. So we did that through making sure we follow through on our mission statement. It says a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment, and how we withhold that through all aspects of DEI was really important to us. So one of the things we did is we formulated an internal DEI committee. So we have individuals on our team that meet regularly to not only move us forward with our strategic action plan goals. Those were initiated by our Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but really allow them to have those meetings independent of me, and they do report back to me. They do give us updates in our biweekly staff meetings. This past year, we also added to our staff meetings after our agenda items. We did 30 to 45 minutes of a deep dive of a subject or topic. So whether that was led by somebody from the DEI committee, we would jump right into police brutality. We went into sizeism and body image. We went through so many various topics that needed to have those conversations, and it was really eye-opening for us because to have that trust and safe space where we can speak authentically. The police brutality, we have 2 individuals that are affiliated with families on the police, and then we have people of color on our team that see it day to day. They live in Philadelphia and commute into New Jersey, so it was really emotional. It brought up feelings of getting things off their chest because maybe our peers don't realize what they go through on a daily basis. And I think it really did strengthen. We still have some, we may still have some emotions and feelings and maybe some differences and kind of viewpoints, but I think it's been powerful that we've done a deep dive in that. There's some eye-opening things we learned too in regards to linguistic justice. We had a workshop here at Rowan University just talking about how individuals in certain communities speak and how we should be accepting of that versus correcting. I used to do that with individuals such as LeBron James when he used certain terminology on an interview. I think to myself, wow, that didn't sound like a person that is a representation of a mentor. But then when I went through that linguistics justice workshop, I'm like, wow, like there are certain things I didn't even realize that we needed learning about code switching. So really powerful stuff that we had in those kind of biweekly. And we made a commitment for this fall, even though obviously we were very busy, is we're going to have to continue those dialogues, those 30 to 45 minute dialogues. We also include our 6 graduate coordinators, and we think that's important, giving them exposure to our conversations. I will admit this past year with the situations, they weren't as outspoken during those dialogues, but they also had their separate meeting to kind of have some discussions of some takeaways, and maybe they could speak in a smaller group about some of those topics. So that was really powerful. We also had some opportunities in realizing the disparities from COVID, with certain populations, what COVID has meant in regards to their home environments and, lack of internet speed and sharing computers. So it really was an opportunity for us to realize the disparities in the populations that we serve. We also, this past spring, made a commitment. January, we have our kickoff staff training, and we deep dove into diversity, equity, inclusion. We really used the NIRSA EDI resource guide. That was powerful. We went over DEI terminology. We went over intersections and the identity wheel. We went over implicit bias. And then during the semester, we have real world connections, which we like to bring in guest speakers. We had one on cancel culture, call out culture. That was really powerful. And then we also had one on privilege. So just having those continual workshops throughout the year saying, it's not just a one-off. We're not just kind of checking off a box. We wanted to make sure to have ourselves represented in those workshops. So one of the things I took away from our workshops is when we were vulnerable and talked about our own mistakes, they found that so powerful. I referenced our custodial staff. She is a African-American. And I think just out of the blue, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we went out to a luncheon to recognize them. And I had mentioned was your supervisor working you like a slave? And it just slipped. But I shared that with our students to say there was no intent. It came out, but I took ownership of that. I apologized. And I think those are the moments where we can have all these terminologies and things going on nationally, but when we bring it home and also realize we're going to make our mistakes. And as much as our hearts and minds are into doing the right thing, this work is hard. So I think that was really powerful with our staff, and we're going to continue to infuse that. We have a Foundations of DEI certificate, Rowan. It's an 8-module course, and 5 of 8 of us have completed that. So we're excited to be able to get that foundational information, as well as now we have an inclusive pedagogy and inclusive campus certificate. Really deep dove into neurodivergent individuals on our campus and how we can create spaces for them. And then lastly, we have a DEI strategic plan with 11 goals. If you just go to rowan.edu/DEI, you'll see there's a strategic action plan goal. So if you're interested in looking at campus recreation goals, they're in alignment with their strategic priorities. We'd be more than happy to share those. But really our next steps now, I've been really trying to work with our team is how do we put things into action? When we think of trainings, how do we infuse DEI and well-being? When we think of our policies, how do we rethink it from a lens of DEI? When we think of marketing, what body shapes and what colors are we representing? So all these things now, how do we tweak and shift things? We're not asking to change the world in one day. We know a lot of this work can be challenging, but we can make those small shifts to make that a more inclusive and welcome space for everybody.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, and we really I like, as you all are going to be talking today, this idea of inclusive excellence and what this means, across identities and lived experiences and how we bring that up. It really kind of highlights the complexity of the work and the continuation of the work. And so have you ever felt as though any efforts you make aren't making a dent in a problem you're trying to help solve on your campus? And if you can explain. Vicki, why don't you start off with this one for us?
Well, I want to recognize first that I may be in a little bit of a honeymoon stage with my new job. I'm listening and talking to people, but they're really not quite sure what to expect from me yet. And so, they're still being pretty kind in their responses and their feedback. But I also know that the attitude of, you're adding one more thing to my plate seems to be pervasive in this whole process. And so I'm trying to really just, I don't want to say ignore that statement, but I want to say I'm trying to turn it around to say, we want this to be a part of our fabric. This is something that we should think of first and foremost whenever we're doing anything, whether it be operational or programmatic or what that is. We should be thinking, and Kevin mentioned a couple areas, we should be thinking about when we're talking about recruiting new staff and definitely when we're retaining staff. We should be thinking about it when we're really reviewing our policies and procedures in terms of, how we're going to be more inclusive, look at criteria that we're using. Is it inclusive or is it exclusive? And are we just using things that we've used for ever and ever and ever and really just not ever previewed or reviewed them in order to make the changes that we now know probably more so than ever that are needed. And so I think that, in terms of, trying to make a dent, sometimes I think the dent is in my head when I bang it against the back of my door at the end of the day. But the truth is that I feel like I have to be repetitive. Each time I meet with unit leaders, I have to say some of the same things over again, and as a reminder, and not to be that person that's speaking like, okay, I said this before, right? Why am I having to say this again? But that person who just says, now as we talked about before, X, Y, Z, and so let's just go over now what changes you've made since the last time I've talked to you. Okay, give me some suggestions. I'm big at saying, okay, here's a note card. We're going to have these conversations, and I expect you to give me your feedback. Usually people are not shy about telling you what's wrong or what they would do different. So I always ask the question about, what did you like about our conversations today? And so I try to really always have that positive spin on it. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm making a dent in the progress that we want to make. And given the fact that, this is work that should have been and could have been, and we wish was done a long time ago. It is new and it is different, and I understand how it's really easy to say, oh no, one more thing I have to do. And so I'm really trying to weave it in and out and show them how it can be a part of the fabric that they just consider with everything they do. And so we've added things like that to their performance management evaluations at the end of the year. Here are the goals. Here are the learning outcomes. Choose one for the next year you want to focus on. Okay, now let's have discussions. But the other thing I hear often is, I don't know how to have these hard discussions. I'm not an expert. How do you expect me to have these discussions? Well, I'm not asking you to be an expert. I'm asking you to learn right along with them. And the learning might be, tell me what you did different as an emphasis on this goal. Tell me what you did different this year that you wouldn't have done if you hadn't learned more about this particular topic or, knowledge or skill or whatever that is. And so I'm just really trying to, make this, it's not easy, but make it easier for them to conceptualize how they fit into the growth and development for their staff and how they have to mentor what's going on. So if their attitude is, it's one more thing to my plate. So think how they're conveying that to the next level and how then they're conveying it to the next level. And so we're not getting anywhere. So that's where I kind of feel sometimes I'm not sure if I'm making a dent, again, because I go back and have to be repetitive, but at other times I'm really excited and really joyful about the fact that people are asking me different questions and they're providing different kinds of feedback that they probably weren't even talking about before. Kevin, you mentioned some of the educational pieces, I jumped into this feet first and I created this series I called Engage, Experience, and Expand. And we took topics difficult, to converse about, and we laid it out there and we laid a little bit of foundation and just to see who would come. I mean, I didn't know if one person would show up, nobody would show up, or if, a bunch of people. And we had about 25 to 30 people each time we had one of these conversations. To me, that was a success. That's 25 or 30 people that hadn't been talking about these topics before. And they were just in up front, I'm not an expert. I'm going to learn right along with you. I'm going to give you a foundation here to start. But let's just have this conversation. And it really turned out well. So, 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step or 2 steps back, sometimes you're standing still. But I think it's starting to move. The dent maybe isn't, is a little bit bigger on the actual topic than it is in my head at sometimes. And so I feel positive about it.
Thanks, Vicki. Well, you all share some really good examples about just, how you're doing the work and then trying to have an understanding of where the dent's being made, right? And so as you're navigating this past year and the amazing work that you all are doing on the ground, what strategies have you incorporated in your professional routine to navigate challenges in times of change? So Michael, why don't you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, thank you. And this kind of piggybacks a little bit off what Ms. Vicki said. It was one of the first things that I wrote down when I saw this question was perspective. And as corny as it sounds, perspective drives performance, right? And how you see what you do is how you're going to do what you do. And I have an opportunity to sit as our co-chair of a task force, DEIB task force for athletics. And that's what we're working on right now, is trying to change the perspective and let people understand and know that there's excellence in diversity. And we try to break it down in each section so people can see that. So perspective is extremely important. When I think about this work too, I think about being emotionally connected to the process and not always the result, right? So I think about this task force that I'm on. I'm confident that this group is going to come up with some great suggestions for Duke Athletics, Duke Rec, golf course that we're going to send up to the Board of Trustees and everybody else. But what comes behind the result, they're going to have an impact on that. And it may not always look the way we want it to look, but we still have to be locked into and emotionally connected to this process that we're trying to make this place equitable. Next thing, too, for me was self-compassion and kind of being compassionate with yourself and being patient with yourself. This is a lot of work. And I know, especially for brown and Black individuals, we feel like we should know it all. And we don't, and we shouldn't necessarily always feel that way. So I think that's something that we should think about. Being authentic in this work is extremely important, and helps you lead and guide folks through some of these difficult conversations. And one of the last things for me is trying to resist oversimplifying this. It's not that easy, right? If it was as easy as X, Y, and Z, someone else would already have done it. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in this transactional work, and that's the X, Y, Z, and then it's done. But this work is about transformation, and if we're going to be transformational, it's going to take time, and it's not just as simple as taking a bucket of money and putting it over here, or just creating this little task force and checking a box. It's really about filling that box in, and I think sometimes we can oversimplify things. Lastly, too, for me, vulnerability, being vulnerable in these conversations, and kind of going with what Kevin said, and acknowledging your mistakes and acknowledging that, hey, we're in this work together, right? And there's no perfection here. We're working on it together, and we're going to get through it together. But those are some of the things that I've kind of incorporated into my day-to-day to kind of help me work through some of these things and be beneficial to those around me, and also kind of lead in this space as well.
Michael, one of the things you said about, mistakes and I've heard this a couple of times. I brought together this group of people. We're a council now, but we're spread out all over the division. And so we have input. And one of the things that we talked about was normalizing mistakes, that it's okay not to be right about everything. And so I like that about what you said. It's, it's not going to be perfect. We know that. I mean, like you said, if we were going to be perfect, we would have done it a long time ago, right? But just kind of trying to make mistakes be normal so that people don't have that. I don't know how to have these conversations, right? It's okay. Let's just start a conversation.
Right. And like you mentioned too, if we wait on perfection, we'll never start the work, right? If we wait for it all to be lined up, we might as well stop today, because we're not going to get there. We really got to get to work to learn and grow together. And like you said, normalize those mistakes and even celebrate them to a certain extent, because those mistakes mean you're trying. Those mistakes mean you're putting in the work. If you're not making mistakes, then you're probably not really putting in that much effort. So that's one of those things I think we do need to normalize the issues and challenges that we all have, and highlight those as well.
And I was hearing Michael and Vicki say, putting a dent in it. My world, and I'm assuming everybody else's world, is changing really rapidly. So it's not even so much that, we're not putting a dent in it. Maybe we put a dent in it, but now there's a new piece of metal in front of us that, it was like, oh, well, I didn't even think of this, it was one of our blind spots. And, so it doesn't discount the work that we've already done, but now we have a clearer picture of the work that we need to do going forward.
And we may never even see the end results of a lot of this work. And that's something that we've got to also be okay with. Like, this is not, if you're in this game for instant gratification, check out too, because this is not it, right? Like, this is work that we're putting in, and going back to my statement in the beginning about what brings me joy, these are things I hope my sons see, right? Like, I may never see them, and I have to be okay with that. And that goes back to my statement about I'm emotionally connected to the process. The result, I may never see that result. I might not see that tree come to light, but I know I planted the seed. I know I've watered the seed, and I've done the things that I need to do so that those behind me and around me can seek and receive that shade.
I love how you all were talking about the missteps and stepping into the mistake, learning from it, moving forward and continuing with action. I think, as I've thought about, my own DEI journey and having opportunities to learn and develop, one thing we really need to remember, and especially for, the white community, white men and women who are engaging in this work, about where are we at, right? So some people, for example, 6 years ago, I had an opportunity on campus to go through this intensive training. Then I was being asked to be engaged in some areas. I have family members and colleagues who may have just started reading about diversity, equity, inclusion, or trying to understand anti-racism and what does privilege really mean. And so the next question is really talking about different forms of action, where action might be something as reading something new and learning and going through that learning journey. And then the action could also be the application of that, if that's through a program, speaking up and using your voice, whatever that might be. So with action coming in many forms, for example, as we address inequities and structures on our campuses, some of us may need to read and learn more about a specific topic. We're going to create a program to provide access to an experience, develop a method for evaluating our facilities, programs, and services for inclusive excellence, to be able to identify, systemic barriers. So can you share with us forms of action you have engaged in during the past year at your university? And Todd, why don't you go ahead and start us off with this one?
Sure. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't hold this up. The NIRSA Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Resource Guide for Leaders in Collegiate Recreation. And it's kind of the intro into a little bit of a story. We started going through this book chapter by chapter last May. And we got, I think, when we were doing it at pro staff meetings, and we got, I think, one chapter, we got 2 chapters in, and Portland erupted. No matter where it is that you get your news, I'm sure you saw images of downtown Portland, and it was a long process. But we actually had to put this guide on hold for a little bit, and we had to, for lack of a better word, retreat into some identity groups. We had a white affinity group, and we had a BIPOC affinity group, and that was within our professional staff, and everybody just did some work on themselves, and to better understand, this book or this conversation, or whatever best served that identity. As we were doing that, Portland was navigating through its identity as well. So I can tell you all, people often ask, it wasn't the entire city. It was like 3 blocks, but it was really close to our campus and really personal to us as a staff and to our student staff as well. And the action in that and that retreat allowed us to step back into the NIRSA guide. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about in this, or have an example of in this conversation, is that it isn't always moving forward. We as a group and a staff had to step backwards a little bit. So we are going through the NIRSA EDI guide. We also created an equity lens decision examination process. So if we have a decision at the department level, we have a series of steps that we go through to examine it from the perspective of people who may not be sitting at the table. And we have our EDI committee, department committee, created this document, but then also is the one that helps transition through the decision. We haven't done it a lot. We've had one complete decision examined and a couple more that are coming up to us, but I'm really just looking at, it's like, how does this decision impact the campus as a whole, and different perspectives, especially those people who may not be part of the decision-making process. The other thing that we did, and I don't know just how unique this is to Portland State, but we realized that a number of our student staff teams weren't very diverse. And, for years, we've been doing trainings for our staff, lifeguard trainings, group exercise trainings, personal trainer trainings, and so forth. And some of those cost money, and we've tried to strip it down to be as least expensive as possible. But there was still a barrier, or we still identified a barrier. One of those barriers, you could take a free leadership development course with the outdoor program. So it was free, but it also cost you time. And the hidden cost in a lot of things is, a student comes and takes a free training from us. Maybe we'll even pay them for the training, in some cases, but what is it costing them outside of that? Do they have to take time off of their other job to go on a weekend trip with the outdoor program so they can get this endorsement? So what we did was, and I should add, does that then impact what our student staff looks like? So what we did was we started doing free trainings, lifeguard trainings, group exercise trainings, and personal trainer trainings for people who had the potential for being a staff member. And, so it's a foreign, I believe, I'm stepping a little bit outside of my expertise here, but it's a $450 personal trainer training. And if someone is willing to commit to working to Campus Rec, we will waive that fee. And in addition to that, we've also created then a cohort of students who then can support each other through the process. We are just starting to get to the point where we're starting to see some of these, or we're getting ready to hire some of these students. So we aren't very far into the whole process to be able to say, oh, well, it worked beautifully, or to be able to identify any of the shortcomings of it. But it was a decision that we made, and it was it's an investment, both time and money. And I mean, I know that the personal trainers in the fitness area, they started it 2 years ago, so it's really kind of it's a long investment as well.
Yeah, I love what you said, Todd, because that's a fantastic idea. This past year, we made a commitment to remove programmatic fees. For group fitness and intramural sports, we traditionally had fees, and we are student fee funded anyway. So it was another add-on price. And we realized, does that impact historically underserved communities? So we made that commitment, but even what you're doing is a fantastic idea. I did want to go back to the affinity groups when we talk about mistakes, and it's a lot of times that we have a great intent, but the result is not ideal. Two things that happen with our teams is one of our professional staffs leads a anti-racist coalition, but originally that group was called, I think, the Association of White Anti-Racists. And there was a lot of pushback from people of color saying, why are you having this privileged white space to talk about moving forward? don't you think you need somebody at the table that experiences on a day-to-day? And I think the intent was there. So that's why they transitioned from the white anti-racist to the anti-racist coalition that has representation from all different communities. But like I said, the intent was there, some difficult conversations, but the end result is, we want to move forward as a community to be better. And then we even had, during our staff training, we had an implicit bias test through the Harvard implicit test. And one of them was about guns and associations. So it was guns and a person of color, and they had to quickly press a button. But the people of color that were in that room, whether they were students or faculty or professional staff, what does that mean for them? How does that make them feel when they are the subject of a implicit bias test when you think of guns and people of color? So, 80% of the room probably didn't think anything of it, and they probably had some eye-opening experiences, but maybe for the 20% maybe that did identify as people of color, that was triggering for them. Like, you're making me take a test and pretty much telling me everyone associates people of color and guns. So again, those were being brave and working together, but also knowing, could we have done that differently, and trying to predict, I guess, the results versus the intent.
Yeah. I'll piggyback just real quick. Todd talked a lot about access, and that's one of the things that came out of our DEIB assessment. And we've really worked to establish scholarships, and kind of alluding to that personal training world, right? That's a $500 application, right? Because you got to have your certification before you can apply. So we've really worked to create some scholarships in those spaces. One of the things too we've done in aquatics is we've really worked to create a different position, right? So the entry-level position in aquatics is typically lifeguard. And we're going to work to create a front desk staff. And the goal there is to have that staff be diverse. And a part of those trainings will be to teach those folks how to swim. So then in turn, they may want to become a lifeguard. But we really try to address access in a variety of spaces. And one of the other things that we've done over the last couple of years is we've partnered with a local middle school that's all brown and black young men, middle school. And we've really worked with them. We're going to take their graduates and actually employ 4 or 5 of them each summer. And be a part of our team. And part of it, again, is about access. And you think about, one of the things I thought about when I started to create that program was the power of Duke, right? Having Duke on your resume matters, right? Whether you like Duke or not, whether you're from UNC, I apologize for not. But having Duke on your resume matters, and it carries weight. And if we can fuel and load up these young men with that little small key of access, just to have conversation with someone, that's a win, and that's a plus. So access is really, really big.
It's funny because I always associate inclusive environment with Portland State. You've always been, in the forefront, I would say. And so it's exciting. And I think that those people who might be listening need to understand that as we're talking and we're conveying the information to you, and I'm writing stuff down. We're learning from each other as much as anything else. And I think that's what's really exciting about doing things like this. It's kind of like our, between sessions conversations we have in the hall, where we learn so much from each other just by having conversations. So thank you. I've learned something from all 3 of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you, Vicki.
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, I was just going to it's a wonderful compliment, and thank you. The thing that I've learned in the last 12 years is that it's not static. Mm-hmm. The 2 universal changing rooms and the all gender bathroom. 10 years ago, that was something. Well, in the last 10 years, we've come to learn that there's quite possibly 5 or 6 different identities that are all trying to use those facilities. If we just talk about the facilities of our rec center, it's families, it's, I can just go down the list of everybody who may want to use a universal changing room or an individual shower space. And what we learned real recently with an assessment is that they don't want to steal the space from one of the other identities. Mm-hmm. So, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, it's kind of like reloading the dishwasher. The rec center is only so big. How do I make another? How do I make more more locker room space, or how do I make, more bathroom space? So yeah, it's not static.
I'm going to go back to the word that Kevin said. He used the word brave, and based off of what you just said, Todd, like, it will continuously be a stepping in and being courageous moment as we navigate new challenges and change that come about. So, with that in mind, when we know that this work is continuous and it's happening in different ways and in different geographical locations and different institutional types, we're all at kind of different places with this. How do you step into the uncomfortable and find the courage to act? Vicki, you want to start us off?
We know that it's easier for some than others for a variety of reasons. When I first was asked about taking on this responsibility, the first question I asked was, what would this older, I didn't say old, I said older, white woman have to do to be successful in a job like this? I mean, that was a question people were going to ask me. I needed to hear what the answer was. And the answer was about, you can facilitate and you can educate and you can, resources, and you can build relationships and you can build structure and you can do all of these things. And the comment was, and personally, I think it's just time we quit asking the brown and black people to do all the work. Mm-hmm. And that I needed to hear that in order for me to feel like, okay, I can do all those things and I can be successful, but I'm going to have to answer that question, right? And I think, for me, it's about being vulnerable. I have to be okay with going into a situation that I am not even close to being an expert in and being able to facilitate a discussion. And I would say that, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that might have not have been as easy for me. At this point in my career, I feel like, I don't have a problem saying I'm wrong. I'm okay with that because I know that I think, Michael, you said, if we aren't making mistakes, we're probably not moving forward. And so I think that as we think about how easy it is for us to change our way of thinking if someone provides us with information we did not have access to. Mm-hmm. It is so easy, but you know what gets in the way, and that's egos. If we can take our egos out of it and just be okay with saying, you know what, you're right, I need to change my way of thinking. Or, you know what, I hear what you're saying, I respect where you're coming from, but I still feel this way, and that's okay too, right? And so I think having those uncomfortable conversations, you really have to let yourself, and we've said it a couple times in a couple of the different areas, you just have to let yourself be vulnerable. It's okay that you don't have all the answers. And I watch, especially, as a young professional, you always feel like you have to be right or you have to know the answer, or maybe people will look at you differently, or they'll look at you like you're not competent. And for me, I always say, if you're willing to come into my office and say, you know what, I made a mistake, I have so much more respect for you than if you say, oh, it wasn't my fault, it was so-and-so that did that, right? And so, again, I think it's about being vulnerable and being okay with being wrong.
I want to add to that. I guess what my proudest accomplishment as a professional was, it wasn't even getting the award. I was very fortunate to get the Regional Award of Merit in spring 2019. But I used that platform as a person of color, as a male, to share my mental health journey. And it was nerve-wracking, but it was therapeutic. I had individuals, I was told, crying students that related to the challenges I went through, and receiving emails after. But I was using that as a platform, saying, as a male person of color, harboring all of the challenges, and maybe some things came up from being an adopted Korean living in a predominantly white community. But, I think, like I said, when Vicki talked about being brave and vulnerable, that was my proudest. It wasn't about winning the award. It was about having the space to give acceptance speech and using it to make people rethink or reflect or be better or support. Like I said, we can't see that dark cloud over their head. They might be smiling, but when you say, how are they doing? They say, okay, but they're not. So, that's one of the things when we talk about, these underserved communities, a lot of them have challenges and maybe different backgrounds and things, multiple jobs. And I think, like I said, that's something we talk about being brave. When you have the microphone, and we know we have some introverts that are fantastic and they need to have the microphone too. But, if we can help the next person in our community, in the nurse community in Campus Rec, whether it's a student or a professional, we need to take action,
I'll piggyback slightly. Oh, I'm sorry, Todd.
No, go for it, Michael.
It's slightly off of what Miss Vicki was talking about. And one of the things I wrote down when I saw this question too was the ability to be confident, but open to change. And as you get more information, you've got to be willing to adapt, right? You got to enter these conversations with some confidence, right? You're talking about challenging conversations. You're talking about things that are tough and painful, right? For many. But you've also got to be open to change and be willing to adapt. And then the other thing too, before I pass it over to Todd, was when you talk about these challenging conversations, follow-up is so important, right? And oftentimes we build ourselves up and we get our speech ready and we go into this meeting and we have this difficult conversation and then we walk out and we leave it. And I think this work is about accountability. And if you want to really see progress, we got to hold each other accountable, right? And follow up, right? Go and plan to have follow up, challenging, courageous meetings, because I can promise you that you're probably not going to address all of those things in that one space at that one time, because it's challenging, right? And you had to muster up the courage. You probably have to muster up the courage 2, 3, 4, 5 times to actually see what you wanted to go after. So follow-up is so important. I know it's nerve-wracking, it's time-consuming, all of those things, and vulnerable, and you got to go through all of those things. But I can rest assured that accountability is how we're going to get through a lot of this, and follow-up is so important as well.
I was just going to tack on to what Kevin said, that you mentioned the ability to be brave. And one of the things that I've learned in the last year is, I used to talk about creating a safe place for people. And in the last year, I've come to realize that I don't get to determine what's safe for someone else. We each get to determine for ourselves what's safe. Mm-hmm. But I can work really hard to create an environment where somebody can be brave. If they choose to be in that moment, and that's really my work at this point in time. Michael, you hit on something. I believe here is like, I wrote down a quote. I'd be remiss if I didn't pull out some song lyric for anybody who's watching this podcast that knows me or has been to the school when I was there, or as faculty. You have to have blind faith, but no false hope. You have to be able to go in. It's a Foo Fighter lyric, in case anyone's wondering. But you have to go in with the ability, or with the feeling that you can be successful. But you have to be able to adapt along the way. And it's not going to go the way that you thought it was going to go walking into the room. Mm-hmm. But that's that. And I come from a background in outdoor recreation, and as an outdoor recreation professional, you get this little logistics sheet. This is how the trip's going to run. Well, you just keep that in your pocket, because there's phone numbers on it that you're going to need to use at some point in time, because along the way you're going to be adapting. It rained. There's an avalanche. The car's got a flat tire, whatever it may be, and it's changing it all along the way. And I think, that's one of the things that I think, has helped me. Those 2 points have helped me step into, uncomfortable situations. That, and another phrase we used to say in the outdoors is, I didn't tell you it was going to be easy. I told you it was going to be worth it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Michael, you brought that up about confidence and things like that. And I just got done doing RA training with suicide prevention. And, one of the things we know is that the worst thing you can do is be silent. When somebody comes to you and, as you were talking, Kevin, you reveal all this. And if you would have gotten no response at all, that would have been a whole different thing for you. Right? Than all of the response that you got. And being silent basically is the worst thing that you can do. And I think about that when we're talking about being accountable and continuing the conversation and not giving up, being persistent with people who really need to have the conversation, because oftentimes when we start talking, we really aren't talking about the actual issue. We have to talk for a while, and you have to listen for a while and not interrupt and all of those things to really get to the issue so that you can have the meaningful conversation. And so that just brought that to mind when you were talking about being accountable. Yeah.
Thank you all for that. I was sitting here listening to everyone, and the next question is about inspiration. So I'm feeling inspired, and it made me just think about a session that I attended with some colleagues around allyship and being an accomplice and being an advocate. And as we work through, people who may be the specific identities who are affected by certain things on our campuses and in the work that we're doing, kind of paying attention to where does it fall for me as someone who's exhibiting allyship, because I'm not giving myself the title of ally, someone gives me that title. But when we're all continuously doing this work together, empowering others to learn and be engaged with the work, this whole idea of inspiring each other about what's going well, what have you been doing? Oh, this was a mishap, really creates that opportunity to inspire each other to continue it when there might be days where we're feeling exhausted, or we need to keep pushing forward and think about what's that next step. So with that in mind, how have you inspired others by sharing work in which you are involved in on your campus or within NIRSA to inspire others to engage in positive change? And so Kevin, I'll turn that over to you first.
Yeah, first of all, really fortunate in the workplace and at the home, just having a supportive environment. My wife is a feminist liberal, and she's opened up my eyes just the glass ceilings of women and pay, and just so I appreciate her for who she is. I also have biracial daughters. I want to make sure that they're aware of their half Korean and a mix of everything else in Europe or whatever for that. But as we kind of mentioned before, like there's so much available out there, whether it's through higher ed or NIRSA available, and I think we are in positions of leadership, and it's important for us to advocate for this continuously. I was reading articles like, okay, during the unfortunate deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and all the unfortunate circumstances, like the book clubs and reading White Fragility, like just skyrocketed. But then like 6 months later, all those groups kind of just like went back to their normal, right? And I think we need to be leaders to say, this is not checking off a box. This is not making me feel good to say I'm in it, and then I jump back out and go through my normal job. So I think, as Todd had said, with the EDI resource, that's been really powerful and as a great framework, really well written, a lot of great resources and practical applications there. And I think even for me, I went through the 8 modules of DEI, but there's still things I forget. I think I have to go back to, is it person first identity or is it identity first? But it's continually changing too. And that's the challenge. Like, what are you supposed to call those individuals in that community? Like, I don't want to offend it because there was an outdated one, but again, we may be well versed through the continuum, but we're still going to sometimes default to like, wait, I don't want to say it because I don't know if it's the right one. So that's really important, is that, again, we're going to flounder and trip, but that's okay. I want to make sure as the individual leading our department that I want to live and breathe it on a daily basis. And then I know I've been fortunate that I've been signing up for all these things, whether it's the Chronicle newsletters to ACHA to NASPA, but there's so much stuff out there about anti-racism and social justice. So it can be sent to your fingertips, which is not another email. I know in Higher Ed we get so many emails, but it's out there. And right now, if you go to NASPA's website, there's a resource right now about moving from words to action, the influence of racial justice statements on campus equity efforts. If you get the Chronicle, Mental Health of Underserved Students, you have to sign up. They say they're going to send you some things from their sponsoring company, but these are some great content that if you want to continue to be deep diving into this But again, opportunities like this and any other things where we can advocate and share that as a community of collegiate recreation, we make this a priority and we want to infuse it to all aspects: outdoor recreation, group fitness, intramural sports, how we can infuse it, that part of their collegiate experience. Hopefully they do want to support their health and well-being and participate with us, but we are going to be inclusive. We are going to be equitable. We're going to do everything we can to say, you belong here, and we want to make sure that you feel authentically well. And then we want you to be a well-being advocate for anybody in different communities. So, really, proud of where NIRSA has been, providing these great opportunities, whether it's the caucuses. I'm very active in the Asian caucus. We have individuals in our offices that are doing the Latinx caucus and the Black women of NIRSA. So really some great things out there with NIRSA, and I'm really proud of the leadership in NIRSA. And they've gone through some challenges. We know the financial challenges that NIRSA has been going through. But again, I'm inspired by even the individuals here on this panel, and it just mentors my former associate director. She was the first woman director in New Jersey, and just she's the one that empowered me to be in a position of leadership. So I just think that we have so many opportunities to, like I said, be brave, step up to the plate, and then reflect on your own too. I think, like I said, this is hard work, and sometimes you need to take a breath. And think about your own well-being as the work is difficult, but it is really fruitful in the end, and knowing we're making those changes that we need.
I think one of the things that really inspires me right now, being kind of the new kid in this realm on our campus, is that I have a couple colleagues who are not afraid to call me out when I make a mistake. I appreciate that. Because sometimes it's not, again, back to it's not intentional. We're having a conversation about pronouns, for example, and throughout the conversation, I feel like I'm pretty aware of that. And when I look at documents, for example, I really am in tune to that. But we were having this conversation and I misspoke. And very gently, the colleague said to me, how we're talking about this, and and pointed out that I had misspoken. I'm just like, I so appreciate that, because there are so many things that are so ingrained in our language that we don't, we don't think about it. We just speak. And another colleague, and I'll share this with you because I think it's so impactful. I wrote a piece around our ODI department, and she called me up and she said, "Why did you use the term redneck when you were talking about your family?" And I mean that, I know I sat back and I said, you know what? I think it was because I was afraid to say the word racist. But I had never thought of it that way before until she called me out. And I just think it's critical that you find those people that are willing to have those kind of conversations with you. And then you have to not be offended by that. You have to understand that's part of your learning and growth, and be okay with that. Back to being vulnerable and being okay and being brave. Right. But yeah, I think that's really what kind of inspires me right now, is that I know I have colleagues who will help me learn through this process.
Something that inspires me too is the action part. Like live your work, right? And again, we talked about this earlier. That's where our department is right now. We've done the DEI assessment, and we've got goals and we've got objectives. We've got to live that, right? And that's going to inspire not only our participants, but ourselves and other departments on campus, and then this university as a whole. But you got to live it. You got to do it. That's inspiring. It's one thing to talk it, but and then right, we talked about this earlier. It's one thing to talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk at some point. And it's inspiring to see people that are willing to go and have these challenging conversations and do this challenging work and understand that they're taking bullets every day and still showing up, right? And I think that's so inspiring to me, and hopefully inspiring to those around us. But that's one of the things that I love too, is live your work. Do what you said you're going to do, and be committed to that, right? And don't sway and don't be a roller coaster, right? Be consistent in that grind, but live your work.
Thank you all. So I'm ready to go do more work. So as we kind of wrap our time together up, I do want to create some space to see if there are any other resources, strategies, best practices that you would like to share with our viewers today for how to sustain critical hope. So this hope with action, and to have that act with an outcome of positive change. So Michael, you want to share a little bit about that and get us started just with anything?
Yeah, just a couple of things. And I know me and Dr. Lucia have talked about this. The first one is be patient, right? I think this work is deep, it's tough, it's complex. Be extremely patient. And then to piggyback off what Ms. Vicki just talked about is find accountability partners, right? Both personally, professionally, and from a departmental perspective. Again, that's one of the things that we're going to work on is when we go through this work, we hope to kind of tie into another department on campus that we can hold each other accountable through some of this work. Share the power is something too that I made a note of. It's not just one or two people that need to drive this force. It is huge. It's big. There's a statement that I saw. It said critical hope can only exist when we acknowledge and resist traditional power dynamics at play in our social systems. We've got to share this work. It's deep, right? It's heavy, heavy, heavy work. And then the last one is healing, right? We've got to take care of ourselves. It is challenging. One of the things that I did, right after the murder of George Floyd, I was asked to sit on every panel in the world. And one of the things I did was I went back and I started to read Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And that was for me, right? I needed to understand what's going through my brain, why it's going through my brain, what my reactions are. So healing is extremely important. This work is heavy, and we can't lift it up by ourselves. We can't be that solo hero. So share some of that work. And those are some of the things that I kind of thought of when we saw this last question.
Yeah, I just want to add is I think, as I mentioned before, like make it relevant to your campus. Like you should be thinking of incidents that happen in your facility, incidents that happen on your campus. What really kickstarted us, our aquatics director is a Black female, and we had a parking lot incident where some students of color in a tinted car were pulled over by the municipal police, not our campus police, and guns were drawn. And it was like 4:00 in the afternoon. And what she had shared with me and our team is, I can't believe that, first of all, we're student development friendly and we care about individuals, but a lot of you just kind of left and went home and didn't think anything of it. And these students were subjected to a traumatic experience. And again, with municipal police pulling guns out. And so it was an eye-opening experience for us to realize, like, look at your privilege. Like you care about students, but those students that were, thought about that may die today. And so those are situations. If you can hit home and think about situations, and again, vulnerable, and say, hey, let's think about situations where we have implicitly or unconsciously biased in situations. I think that's important when you can hit home. Yes, we have all these national studies and we have resources, but how can you make it relevant to your spaces? I think that's so powerful.
And not just your spaces, but your people. You know what I mean? I think, Kevin, you alluded to your conversation. And that's one of the things, too, that I've tried to do is be more vulnerable and share my experiences, right? Because people see me as Mike and it can get lost, right? That I don't deal with that stuff, but I do, right? So I think it's important to share some of those experiences as well.
I think for me, one of the things that's been, I've been around campus for a long time. Some people would say long enough, but a long time. And I think the thing that's really come back around is the relationships with, like, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the LGBTQA department, the Women's Center, OASIS, all of these departments that deal with students who might have the opportunity or missed opportunity to be included in something, and they are or aren't. And so they're hearing the stories. And so if we don't understand or haven't heard the stories, then we don't know what action to take. And I think that's been really critical for me, is to really, I wasn't really disconnected, but I was connected in a different way. Now I'm asking different questions, and I'm getting the kinds of things that are helping point me to, okay, here's where we need to focus on some of our goals. Here's where we need, the learning needs to take place, or whatever that looks like, but really connect with your folks who are hearing the stories. I would say one of them, our campus rec is, predominantly white in its staff. Now, its students are pretty diverse, but the staff is pretty white. And my dear colleague at, in ODI said, I have students come to me and say, I can't relate to the staff like I'd like to because there is no diversity there. They're hearing that. So why would we not utilize them as resources to find out where we need to focus some of our work?
I'm going to share something that Michael shared with me a while back, because Mike and I had some time to have a conversation about that, Vicki, back last year, probably in the fall, and then probably again in the spring. And working in a department where there are not many people of color, and it was kind of like, how can we create access points? And so what I ended up doing was just individually building relationships, which now this is more departmentally, right? And finding time to get to know some of the students that maybe I didn't have in class or worked with the student organization in. And that has proved now, not back in the fall when I wasn't sure where it was going to be going. It's been interesting and exciting to see some of the conversations that I've had in the spring and then even this summer, where I'm going to have some opportunity to get together with students and kind of see how we're introducing people to industry, people, other colleagues on campus where they can go and create the identity space. But now they see that I may be someone who is exhibiting allyship if I get that claim of creating support and access in different ways. Todd, anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
I really want to echo what Michael said about taking care of ourselves, because there's the work, but then there's also navigating with colleagues and knowing what their intentions are and knowing what your intentions are and knowing that those intentions are almost identical, but looking at it from, offset of each other or taking a different path towards it. And I know in our department that takes energy, and being able to step back and recharge yourself and work with your colleague again, I think is just super important. Shouldn't say work with your colleague again. That didn't come out exactly the way I meant it. Sorry. And then and I think probably I'm echoing somebody else too when I say own the work. I remember somewhere along the line being told, yeah, you didn't create this problem, but you can't let it keep going on. And so that's always just kind of stuck in my mind with this one. It was like, that's just okay. This is the work we do.
Yeah.
So.
And I think too, just to piggyback off that last statement, I think it's important to understand the past so that we can have an idea as to what we need to do in the future, right? A lot of times we try to start this work in 2020. And that's not it, right? Like, yeah, the past is extremely painful. It's nasty. It's negative. It's challenging. But if we don't dig into that slightly, right, it's going to be really hard to come up with concrete ways for us to make, true transformational change. And I think, too, again, that past is tough. It's hard. It's ugly. It's dirty. We weren't a part of it, kind of like Todd just said, right? I didn't create this mess. But we need to understand a little bit of it so that we can, in turn, create some sustainable, true change for our universities, for our departments, for ourselves, and for our teams as a whole.
Unlike what we do in the hallway between sessions when we're doing all this learning, I really would like to hug each one of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to close too is that if your institutions or departments or divisions are really pushing a well-being initiative and a DEI initiative, they need to be aligned together and working together, because DEI is well-being for identities, right? And I feel like sometimes they're on different pathways and they don't infuse the language of both. And so if you have a big well-being initiative and you're not infusing the DEI language and identities, start getting that put in there. If you're very big on DEI, but you're not having a well-being initiative, that is well-being, right? We are recognizing the systemic barriers for certain communities. So I think that's super important. Whenever you have either, they should be doing both together. And for those individuals in DEI, make sure if they're not realizing the research and terminology of all the well-being stuff, get it to them, make sure they know, hey, this is relevant to moving us forward, and then vice versa. Well-being, if it's all privilege, it's white people have privilege for well-being. No, it's for every individual in the community, regardless of their identity.
Great connection there, Kevin. I just want to say that this has been amazing having the four of you together. I was just sitting here thinking, we're getting ready to kick off fall semester after coming off of 2020 into 2021. Todd, we know you got a little bit of time. So some universities, you've got about 6 more weeks before you all get kicked back up with students. But I just want to say, thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this first set of the vlog series for Change Makers of NIRSA. Really appreciate, all the work that you all are doing on your campuses within the association, and as well as sharing, resources throughout this session. My hope is to put some links to some of the things that you all mentioned in a blog written up series that will highlight the video. And so just want to, again, acknowledge that, throughout this year, may we continue to challenge ourselves to listen, learn, and do better. And may we inspire each other as we progress forward as change makers and critical hope. And most importantly, however, let us be the change the world needs to create and sustain healthy communities. So be well, NIRSA family, and be the change. And just one more time, thanking Michael, Todd, Vicki, and Kevin for being here with us today. So go out there and be the change, whatever piece of change that is, wherever you are on this DEI inclusive excellence journey. You've got this, and you've got colleagues there to support you, and they're doing the work as well. And bring others along. All right. Thank you so much for today.